We want to welcome everyone back. We're now going to delve into the interesting realm of consumer behavior and food choices. So I'm going to ask the second panel to come on up to the stage and get themselves comfortable. The Dietary Guidelines scientific report tells us that sound behavioral interventions could lead to a culture of health for our nation. Here to lead our discussion on consumer behavior is Dimick, the executive editor of the National Geographic magazine. Dennis leads the magazine's coverage on energy and climate issues, and you'll see the food issue, of course, is out on the table for anyone to grab and read if you have not read it already. Dennis has been a key to shaping the National Geographic's award-winning environmental reporting since the year 2003. Dennis was the creator of the special year-long editorial on population, National Geographic's 7 billion, which of course you know we've already exceeded 7 billion population on the planet, and we're headed for 9 billion. This was an acclaimed series on how our world will change with an unprecedented population. And thank you, Dennis, for sparking this national conversation and for being part of today's program. And if anyone's still out in the lobby, please come in now because the doors are going to be closing and we're not going to let you in. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here for this important conversation on dietary guidelines and how we can be more healthy in the way we live. And the focus of our panel this hour really is to try to essentially examine levers and changes in behavior and what we can do to affect consumer behavior on these issues. And so our panel today, to my right is Leslie Lytle. She is professor and chair of the Department of Health Behavior at the University of North Carolina. She's a professor of health behavior and nutrition at the Gillings School of Global Public Health at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her research focus is health promotion of youth and young adults, particularly preventing obesity and promoting healthful diet and physical activity through school, family, and environmental approaches. And to her right is Dr. Robert Murray, who is a professor of human nutrition in the Department of Human Sciences at the Ohio State University. He is also the president-elect of the Ohio chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics and a fellow of the Academy. Dr. Murray previously worked at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, where he started the Center for Healthy Weight and Nutrition. And to his right is Gnel Gabrielyan. Dr. Gabrielyan is a postdoctoral researcher at the Food and Brand Lab at Cornell University. His research focuses on consumer and behavioral economics. He holds a BA from Armenian Agricultural Academy and a PhD in economics from Washington State in Pullman. Gnel is stepping in for his colleague, Dr. David Just, who was called away and unable to join us this morning. So in preparing for this discussion, I was given some information from Ohio State University regarding this, and one thing that stood out for me was that there, according to research that is dealing with adoption of guidelines, and it was said that NPD Group, which is a research organization, has a national eating trends database, which tracks the eating and drinking habits of U.S. consumers, and that the average consumer meets at least 70% of the dietary guidelines for the recommended intake for dairy, fruit, grains, proteins, and vegetables on only 7 days out of the year. So we have a, whatever you want to call it, a healthy eating gap, perhaps. There's much work to do to raise that percentage, and I think that that really is what we would like to explore today, really, is how can we improve that level of adoption and behavior change. And so most experts agree that the only way to shift to healthier eating patterns is through harnessing the power and the reach of all influencers across public and private sectors. However, too often there is little focus on consumer participation. So we can talk about top-down, but what about grassroots and individual engagement? And so I would ask each of you then this question is, so from the consumer point of view, one, why haven't the dietary guidelines been successful in changing behavior? But more so, what might it take to make them more successful? Dr. Lytle?
Yeah, our record doesn't look so good, does it? If we're only meeting 70% of our guidelines 7 days out of a year. I think the guidelines have been incredibly useful, as you said, at a policy level. But when an individual decides what they're going to eat, they're not usually thinking about what the dietary guidelines say. They're thinking about what they're hungry for, what they can afford, what's available, who they're going to be eating with. And so more information on why people should eat a certain way or how it will benefit their health is not going to impact their behavior. We have lots and lots of research that shows that. To the extent that our food decisions are made by our taste preferences, our social influences, accessibility, and our culture, that's where the action is. And the previous panel used the terminology culture of health. And we really need to make a shift in our culture towards a culture of health. And thinking about that, it's not, it can't rest on the shoulders of the individual who's making the decision about what to buy at the grocery store at that moment or what to order at a restaurant. Without a culture that supports that goes everything from the price of food to what's being marketed to us to what is the norm in our group, in our community. We're not going to make inroads until we start having some real cultural shifts around food.
So it's about the messaging that we're receiving in all of our various cohorts, and whether it's messaging in the marketplace, whether it's messaging in schools or in our own community.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's really difficult to change. And so that's why the top-down approach is so important, because it does provide a beginning place to start making cultural shifts. But I think as we go forward and try to think of ways to make this change, we're going to need to be thinking of other leverage points along the way. Other, maybe not policy, but other public opportunities to start to change that cultural shift about what we should be eating.
Okay. Dr. Murray, so you're to jump off on that. What do you see as the possibilities and where we could try to make these more successful?
When you think about the dietary guidelines as a parent or a grandparent, they look very, very different than they do as a document, as a 700-page document. And I really think we ought to think of two different types of dietary guidelines. The first one being the science that we're looking at, where we're looking at dietary patterns and we're looking at nutrients to get the best understanding of how nutrition can lead to health. But I think the second one is the consumer dietary guidelines, and I don't think it should be the same one. And I say that for a number of reasons. You know, we have a lot of debates over the science, and it confuses the public greatly when we debate things, but it needs to be debated. Secondly, you know, when you talk about things like dietary pattern, and we talk about the Mediterranean, well, nobody eats the Mediterranean diet. Even in the Mediterranean, they don't eat the Mediterranean diet, whatever that is. Everybody at the ground level, the starting point is their own personal dietary pattern. And it's not something where you go to a goal, I need to get to the dietary pattern of health. It's a continual lifelong adjustment. I mean, we talked last time on the last part of the panel about, trying to have a life course because the needs and the desires and the stresses are different over life. And that's exactly what our individual personal eating patterns are. So the tension that's in the dietary guidelines, I think, is between the way that they're debated and the information we look at and the way that that is spun for the public. We have a lot of debates about, there's an internal tension, you can see it in the 2015 dietary guidelines again, between this desire for the optimal pattern for health and this prohibition to exclude individual nutrients to get there. In reality, those are two very different ways to get to health. If I know a lot, I can say if I avoid saturated fat and I avoid sodium, I can make your cardiovascular risk better. But I point out that we've been wrong about fats, and we've been wrong about cholesterol, and we've been wrong about things. I think we're going to be wrong about saturated fats. I don't think the story's that clear. So the consumer ends up with this message that gets all bent out of shape when they're trying to use information to make their personal dietary pattern. And what I see happen is, as I was going around the country, I've been going around the country arguing in favor of chocolate milk because they want to pull it out of school. And the truth of the matter is, are we going to get anything for getting those 2 teaspoons of sugar out? I know what I can get if I can get dairy hit. I know what I can get in terms of not just osteoporosis, but in terms of cardiovascular disease. 2 very different ways of getting to better health. Personally, at the ground level, I favor the latter. Get the dairy in. If Hispanic kids don't like anything but whole milk, then give them whole milk. Get the dietary pattern established. So I think the problem with the dietary guidelines is you're trying to write one document that encompasses all science and sell it to all the people the same way, and it's not going to work.
So, part of this, though, is you talked about lifeways. And so it's, when one is looking holistically at this is not just diet. It's also, when I think about my own life, it's not just what I eat, but what is my exercise and how am I thinking about this holistic? That's part of the challenge too, isn't it? There are 2 halves of a whole, really, right?
They are the same thing. I think that's exactly right. And you saw that written into the dietary guidelines in 2005 and 2010, and again here, that physical activity really is part of the determinant. And when you look at the health benefits, those 2 are not just duplicative, but they actually are synergistic. So it's an important thing when you're looking for health. Consider your physical activity in the context of your eating and vice versa.
Right. Gnel?
I guess from my name, you realized I'm foreigner, and I kind of excused myself not reading the dietary guidelines. And when I asked fellow Americans if they know they've read the document, so a few people have read, and because it's kind of their job, they're nutritional specialists. A few people, they're like, yeah, I know it's there, but some of them, they don't even know what it is. So when we talk in this auditorium about dietary guidelines, and I'm sure most of people know and they've read, but when we go to the individual level, at some point people are not interested or they just don't know. So and then one of the major, information disseminators is the media. And I know we are in National Geographic auditorium, but we know sometimes media can take the idea or the thought and then just interpret the way they want to. And that kind of will give not the wrong information, but different information what the guidelines are about. And we know that consumers are usually very selfish. So I know it says the caffeine or alcohol are good in moderation. And I'm like, I just see that are good part. And I kind of sometimes can skip the moderation part and drink 5 or 6 cups of coffee in a day or in just lunchtime period because I have to do work. So we have to, and I kind of echo lots of other thoughts, that we have to really target the final individuals in a cultural base, in a socio-demographic groups differently. So we don't really give one size fits all message to all the consumers, but give different aspects and not just say, drinking or taking sugar, eating sugar is bad. We can say something is better than just doing something is bad, because the idea of also the message, how we tell people what to do or what not to do. When you say you're not supposed to do something, people get really uproar, and there is huge reactance out of that also, because we are kind of limiting their options in a way. So the messaging also really matters, how we give the information to the consumer.
Don't focus on don't do this, but focus more on, as a parent this morning, watching the presentations, it was like dietary guidelines. That's kind of like I'm going to talk to my kid about dietary guidelines. But if I say to them, more fruits and vegetables, less sugar and sugary drinks, that's tangible. And so you have a positive, but you also have a like, go this way and maybe not so much here, right? That's Leslie?
I'm going to jump in there because about 15 years ago or so, I did focus groups with little kids, kindergarten kids to 6th graders. And the focus groups were about to see how they understood nutrition messages. And the youngest kids, the little 5-year-olds, when I would say, tell me what a healthy food is, they knew. It's fruits and vegetables. I should eat more fruits and vegetables. And what are some things that are not so healthy? I probably shouldn't eat so many cakes and cookies. So we all know what we're supposed to eat. And we can get derailed when we start thinking, should I be eating saturated fats? How much sodium? Is skim chocolate milk okay? I think sometimes we use those nuances of nutrition, nutrient science as an excuse to say, the science doesn't know, so I'm going to keep doing what I want to do. I think some pieces of information that people really do need is they need not the why or what information, but they need the how. And we talked about that in the first panel. People know they should eat more fruits and vegetables. They don't know. People don't know how to prepare them. They really don't. People understand that there's a food label, but do not understand that when they're planning their menu for their family for the week or even that day, what that food label is telling them. So I really believe that we need, if we're going to get the consumer to embrace the food patterns that are in the dietary guidelines, which really have not changed that much in the last 35 years, we need to make the information, the skill-based information, more accessible. I'm not sure that that's through pamphlets. I know we often talk about physicians need to be involved. I really think it's through peers. I think we talked this morning also about being in community and making sure that our community, that dietary advice is translated into a specific community. I think that's absolutely right on. But I think we need to figure out a way to have social connections within the community making those translations. Because that social norm piece is the piece where we really start changing the culture. Not when I read a pamphlet about what I'm supposed to eat or my doctor tells me what I'm supposed to eat, but when my neighbor, when my mother-in-law, when my niece.
Modeling good behavior.
Yeah, not only modeling, but helping.
Yeah.
So,
Mentoring.
how do I make kale salad? Let me show you how to make kale salad. That's gonna translate better if there's somebody telling me that I know and trust.
On the ground practical.
Yeah.
So let me take that idea, the social aspects of it. Let's talk maybe just historically a bit. Are there this idea that looking back, if there are things we can learn from history that could inform where we are now and in the future, examples of successful public health initiatives that resulted in behavior changes, and what might those be, and what could we learn from them?
Yeah. I really like this question because I've been in public health for 30-some years now, and went through my head, what do we know about good public health initiatives? And, I came up with fluoridation and folate. I came up with injury prevention with seatbelts and helmet use. I came up with screening and vaccination. Those are great public health initiatives that aren't going to apply at all to this, because those are more one-time behaviors. They're things that we can do at a population level. We can put fluoride in the water, and no one has to decide, am I going to be fluoridated today? The closest one we have as far as public health initiatives is the drop in cigarette smoking, which went from about 60% of our population down to about 17%. And there's really, in my mind, there's some real differences, obviously, between tobacco use and eating. You can't tell people to not eat. So abstinence is absolutely not an option. But I think there are a lot of levers that were pulled with the smoking epidemic and problems that we could pull here. And I think there are two big things that we need to be thinking about in our dietary patterns that map on very nicely to what happened with tobacco. One is that in both cases there is an industry that is marketing and supporting sometimes not the most healthful aspects. Much easier to control in tobacco, because you can just say, you can really vilify the tobacco industry. Much more difficult with food, because again, we need food. But again, we do have this industry that benefits when people choose less healthful foods. The second piece is that it's sort of this culture or emotion or affect and habit. Just as people sometimes smoke when they're nervous or stressed or depressed, we eat for all those reasons too. So thinking about how we manage a lifestyle that allows us to be more mindful and thoughtful about what we eat and make those decisions, I think there's some parallels there with tobacco as well.
Dr. Murray?
I think we have seen some tremendous nutrition success, and we just mentioned some of them. Cholesterol, we cut cholesterol from 43%, or from fairly high levels down. In the process, though, one, we were wrong about the science. Two, we decimated the egg industry in the process of doing that. When we did fat, it was much worse. I mean, we were successful getting people to cut their fat down by a huge margin. Industry followed along like a puppy and changed all the products. And as a result of that, people got worse. So because the science was wrong, that fat was not the cause of fat and total fat was not the cause of cardiovascular disease. And we suddenly realized that we'd made a mistake. I think the problem is that the food industry has followed our dictates. And you saw that with, we even had eggs that didn't have any yolks in them, and we had powdered eggs, and there were nasty stuff that came out of that whole thing with cholesterol that we started back in the 40s and 50s. In the fat era, everything was fat-free, and as a result, but they still have to sell this food as an industry, so they still are forced with taste, value, and convenience. They have to address that, so they use carbohydrates to make it taste good enough where people would eat it, and they paid the price for that. I think that that's part of the problem. We corner people into these things, and the best way to get people to change personal dietary pattern is to stop vilifying individual things and begin giving them a sense of the power to make incremental changes. So if you say to them, you shouldn't be eating lean meat, which, we say, don't eat red meat at all, it's a bad thing. Well, they like hamburgers. They're going to eat the hamburger. Now the question is, how do you help them make a better hamburger? If you do, you can make a whole grain bun, you can use guacamole instead of mayonnaise, you can put tomatoes on there, you can substitute spinach or kale, as Leslie mentioned, instead of iceberg lettuce. There's a lot of ways you can make them benefit, but still allow them to eat that way. I always think about the moms, and you know this, moms and dads in the age where the kids are 6, 7, 8, 9, and they're in ballet, and they're in gymnastics, and they're in, you know, and you basically get in your car after work and drive around. And at 8 o'clock, you're simply not going to start cutting vegetables to make a elegant salad with cheese. And so you end up doing fast food. And that's that moment in time for that family. So we need to help them make a decision. They got to eat away from home. How do they do that right? Rather than telling them, don't go eat fast food, it's a bad thing, you're a bad person, a bad parent. If you do that, that's not the message.
So the eating patterns are in large measure a result of the lifestyle that we've surrounded ourselves with.
But we can make it incrementally better. I mean, if I'm going to eat cookies, and frankly, I'm a cookie addict, but I can choose between eating a cookie that doesn't give me anything and eating an oatmeal cookie with nuts and dried fruit in it. But I still get my cookie. So I'm not denying myself something. This is important. It's Dr. Achterberg laughing at me. But I think that's the important message. You know, we talk about pizza, we talk about these other things. School food service has made the pizza better. They make a white whole grain crust. They use lower fat cheese, they use turkey pepperoni, and then they don't tell the kids about that. And that's part of the secret. But I think, you know, we expect fresh fruits and vegetables. We expect all these things of the public, and that isn't where they're situated. They need to say, in my little world, every meal, every snack, every drink I have, I'm going to pick from the 5 food groups, but I'm going to look for something that I like to eat and make it a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. Same thing with exercise, you know.
Right.
So had some patients in the obesity center.
Right. It's not just
a 100-yard walk.
Right. Sure. If you're going to have the cookie, then go walk a mile first,
yeah.
right?
It takes a lot of walking.
Right.
Yes.
Gnel, I'm fascinated to hear your perspective.
So I guess I'll continue the idea, not in 30 years, but in the last 2 years. I was reading first that coffee is really bad. There was a research or two saying that coffee is dehydrating human body, so you have to really decrease the coffee consumption. Then a couple of months later, it says, actually, coffee is not that bad. And then it doesn't dehydrate you a lot, so it almost works like a water. And then there was a research saying that coffee is actually good because it motivates you. I don't know, it creates some, I know, in brain, some chemicals, which makes you more efficient. So just in 2 years, the research changed dramatically from not good to good. And we see all this research done, and sometimes people, they don't trust the research anymore. When there is something coming up, something is good or bad, they're like, what if tomorrow they say it's good, actually? So, and there was research saying that hamburgers and fries are not bad. Like, there was a huge media coverage recently, which I don't know what it was based on, but so we see all these reports that something is good, something is bad, and it changes so frequently. People don't trust, but then when we say, oh, dietary guidelines are this, so we have to get more vegetables and fruits, eat less of sugar and sodium, then they sometimes don't trust us. And for, I think, recent years, again, not being American, and I'm not criticizing America too much, but I know that in US, there was huge centralization of fast foods, stores, and living in the US without a car, when you have to drive 5 miles to get the groceries, you buy full bags of things for a week consumption. And that kind of restricts my consumption, let's say, even if I had the money to buy at least proportionally what I want to, but I couldn't buy enough fruit and vegetables to survive for a week before I go to the store next time. And
because you were carrying too much. You have too much.
You have too much, and the refrigerator just has enough space for some food items. And then you don't buy vegetables and fruits because they go bad quicker, faster. And I like the idea also that changing or saying you don't have to consume that or that, rather than we have to consume them in a mixture or not always. So if you've seen my grandma's soup and how much fat it had on the top, oil, you would think is just really, really, I don't know, unhealthy. But we also have to consider how people cook those items, how to incorporate the butter into the cooking rather than vegetable oil, which was another discussion of how good or bad things are. So we have to know, even if we consume something, how it's prepared. And back to the how part also is kind of very important as well. Because 2 days ago at school, I was, one kid or a couple of kids said, why the pears are bad? But they were not bad. It was just a different color of pear, which was brownish. And they had to announce for the whole lunchroom area that the pears are not bad. It's just the color of that specific type of pear. So if something is new or slightly different to population, they just don't know what to do, or if they're not aware of if it's a gone bad product or how to prepare the product. And we see all these questions a lot coming up. So I guess educating again, just how to make things, what to make with what, and not really decreasing your consumption of cookies and chocolates in my case, but how to make the more healthy options in your daily meal, not restricting you a lot of your favorite items.
I'd love to go into it more, but the clock is the tyrant, so I have to move on. So I think on another level, I mean, it's like, so we have these guidelines, and so we've talked about consumer, but it's also this on the policy level, and how can we make these, how can we make best use of policy issues, really? I know we've already focused on consumers, but is there some strategy change that we should have depending upon targeted populations, or are there different approaches we should be taking with individuals versus policy? Why don't we explore that?
I think the place where the dietary guidelines are making the most important impact on our population are in the federally subsidized food programs. A high-level policy, if you're at WIC, if you're in a school, to have that policy that says, here's the food that is available, that's incredibly important. I think a missed opportunity that is sort of between that policy, federally subsidized meals, and Joe Consumer, or Josephine Consumer when she chooses what she's going to have for dinner tonight, is another level that we haven't tapped. And I'm thinking of other places in our society where people often eat communal meals. So I'm thinking work sites. I'm thinking recreational community events. When was the last time you went to a sports, went to see the baseball team or the basketball team or even the college sports team? There's lots of places where stakeholders are making decisions about the foods that are available to people that are sort of in a restricted environment, right? So I've done some work in work sites, and I'm actually as part of Blue Zones, where we looked at the foods that were available at a work site where the workers were expected to stay at the work site. They were manual laborers, they were coming in, and I looked at what they were offering those folks, and it was catered, but it was terrible food. And when I talked to the manager about, could you offer other foods? And it was like I all of a sudden grew another head. They had never thought about the fact that maybe there's some responsibility or opportunity for that work site to be thinking, what are we really serving here? I think we can make the same case for, as I said, our community centers, our recreation venues, churches. I grew up a Methodist. We had lots of dinners by the Methodist ladies. And I think that's one of those community places where, again, that social change can start to happen with the reconsideration of when we eat together as a community, what do we serve? I think that would be a good place to go that I don't think we've gone before.
How to trickle down from federal to state to local to community to peer groups, that kind of thing.
Some things are that kind of local. We just did a policy statement in the AAP where we were looking at schools And you know, we talked about all the success we've had, and we talked about it this morning. Schools have done tremendous things for nutrition in kids in the last 20 years. But there's this third venue of school, not the vending machines, not the school meals, but it's parents and students and teachers bringing food in. And you know, when they have a football game, they get the little booth up there, they make a choice to bring in lousy food. And that's a parental choice, very local kind of thing. And I was interested in the concept of policy because you've seen some decisions made that I think are really powerful, and then other ones I think that may get us in trouble in terms of policy decisions and execution in those very important programs you were talking about, Leslie. In WIC, for example, you know, they revamped the food packages, rethought, and that's something that should be a regular thing. Great idea. They just gave people the option of using yogurt instead of, because the moms are saying, I've got all this milk, I have too much milk. And then you have other moms saying, you know, I'm lactose intolerant, I can't get any benefit from this, and things like that. So they gave them some flexibility. That type of flexibility we need to rethink on all of our policies. How do we make it work so that they can hit their marks on getting in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, dairy, and quality protein? So any way we can make it easy for them, make it easy for them. On the flip side of that, we have mandated a 50% cut in sodium in school meals over a 5-year period. And even though I'm really excited that 95% of the school food service directors have stepped up and figured out how to make these changes that we asked them to make in the last couple of years with almost no new money, 50% cut in sodium is going to change the big kahuna, which is taste. Yeah. And it doesn't do us any good. First of all, I don't know that we know what the public health benefit is going to be of cutting sodium by 50% in children and teenagers. But even more than that, if we cut the sodium and it ends up tasting like sawdust and they don't eat it, we just threw away an incredibly important program. They're going to quit going, they're going to bring their own meals, diet quality is going to fall, we're going to do harm. And this is a problem with the cholesterol story and the fat story, and I think the sodium story is starting to unfold the same way, and the sugar story. We do harm when we do it badly, when we do these things badly. It may be pure, it may come down from the mountain on the tablets, but it still isn't going to be followed by the public, and that does harm.
So it's almost like if I was a restaurateur, for example, you know, and many of us eat much of our meals away from home. If I could, we'll think of a different name than the Dietary Guidelines restaurant, but if in fact we were able to
I'm not eating there.
open something and it was actually a tremendous success, that's
Yes.
where you're beginning to make an effect in the marketplace of how people change their dietary patterns.
And if you give industry that kind of guidance, I think they will move incrementally to get to the point where they'll still maintain taste and still be able to lower sodium, but you can't do that so easily across the board, and it's not an easy task to reformulate product. 50% cut in things will be extraordinarily difficult.
We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to try to do a lightning round here at the end here on this last one. So, I mean, the question is, how do you make dietary guidelines actionable and realistic? And I guess I'm going to come at this from the viewpoint of, so we here are an organization that speaks to a global community, and we are, as an organization, we are in a transition mode ourselves. We've had traditional ink on paper subscriptions, and yet we know that the way people are getting their information and that they are creating social change is shifting profoundly. We see that just in the past 7 or 8 years, there's been a huge people have phones in their pockets that become tools for social change, for change in behavior. What advice could we leave the group and to think about are we at an inflection point? Is there some mechanism that we haven't examined yet, especially given the way people are getting their information now, that we should be thinking about?
I think potentially, although I I'm a little concerned that that technology is being oversold as the next best thing.
I mean, just an app? We'll just do an app, right?
Right. We'll just do an app. We'll just all you need to do is
Have your $500
self-monitor.
watch.
In fact, one of the my $500 watch. One of the behavior changes that the dietary guidelines looked at was actually self-monitoring. And obviously there's this huge growth in using apps and my Fitbit and all kinds of fancy things to self-monitor. The research that's starting to come out on whether or not those things actually make a difference in health and behavior long term is not looking so good. And it's the idea that people can be motivated by tracking and these technology gadgets for a little while, but then the next best thing comes. So, I'm a little, I'm not so optimistic that we found the thing with the app. I think maybe the social media and the Facebook might be a little different.
They're different.
Because in that case, it's the social connection. And I think it's through the social connection that we change norms and we look around and we say, people like me don't do that anymore.
Right.
People who I know really do figure out how to eat a healthier diet and plan ahead and et cetera.
That's one of the things that happened with cigarettes.
Exactly.
It's like it was peer pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Gnel, how about you?
I would think, as any other intervention, that will work a short time period, as fellow panelists mentioned. So we always do an intervention, and then we see the hike of the intended item to be increased. And then, but after some time, after that surprise factor is gone, then we'll go back to our normal or previous consumption. So my idea would be, when we do the intervention with an app, Facebook or any Twitter thing, then after some time, when we have that efficient or the best time period, when we see the decline of consumption, we make new intervention through different tools or change something there, so it keeps people interested. So when we have long time period enough for that new consumption pattern, then that high consumption intake of fruits and vegetables becomes a new norm for consumers.
Step level shift.
It's kind of, we still have to keep it going up in a while to make people interested for the next time they go to buy something. They're like, oh yeah, I have to have my vegetables for my lunch or my dinner.
So, Dr. Murray, while Ken is coming up for questions, do you have any
Can I ask Gnel a question? I'm going to take the first question, Ken. I was interested, I think people may not know all the information about the smarter lunchroom process in school, but it's fascinating the work that you all are doing at Cornell in telling us kind of the hidden ways that we make our own personal decisions and ways that you can shape that without us even knowing that we're being shaped.
So basically the idea of our center is how to change the environment, the culture in that setting when you don't even notice how you make the selection based on basically where the fruits are placed in the room. And so they came up with an idea of changing the setting in the cafeterias. So they bring the vegetables in front. The fruit bowl will be very nicely transparent type of bowl, glass or plastic, but right close to the cashier. So when they check out, they see that nicely looking orange and apple. They're like, oh, I want to grab one. And so far, the data is quite promising. And then what's interesting, when we do the fruit intervention, the vegetable intake goes up as well. When we do the vegetable intervention, the fruit intake goes up. So that kind of goes with my idea that, let's say we can do the fruit intervention at the beginning. So when we see that it starts declining, we do the vegetable intervention, something new. So it keeps growing, and our psychology and, again, environment works really interesting way. When you tell people it's a strawberry yogurt and there is no strawberry in the yogurt, they're blindfolded. But because of that idea of there is a strawberry, we mix some chocolate there, and people are like, oh yeah, I think there is 7 out of 9, like our grade level, there is a strawberry flavor. And there is none, actually. But the way they perceive the information given to them really impacts their aftertaste or after they do the study.
I remember when I worked at Abbott, you came into the lunchroom, and the first thing that hit you was the salad bar. And so there might have been a lot of other stuff, but you were enticed by the fact that and I got salad about 90% of the time because it was staring at me. But I think that stuff is, and of course, USDA is adopting the smarter lunchroom for schools, which I think that's the kind of psychological information we really need.
Our panel did an outstanding job. Thank you. Don't go anywhere. We have 8 minutes, 47 seconds for questions. If anyone, please wave your hand and get going. Let's get the microphones to anyone with a question or comment. You heard it first here. Perhaps next year we'll have the Nat Geo DGA Deli online, and we'll start selling taste that's also good for you. We have a question right down here. Please.
Hi, good morning. I'm TJ Bertinsky. I have a question regarding policy and sort of getting policy to marry what we're saying where the rubber needs to meet the road. We've got large subsidies and we spend a lot of money as a nation on corn, soy, wheat, but we're telling Americans to eat more fruits and vegetables. Color me confused. What does my country want me to do?
I'd love to take that one because I think you're absolutely right on, and we didn't get to talk about that. So again, when we think about the parallels between smoking and food, I think that piece really comes up. So I currently live in North Carolina, which is a tobacco growing state. And when I moved there, I said, so what happened to tobacco here? Because it's a pretty smoke-free place. And what I was told was, brick by brick, tobacco got dismantled by local, tobacco-free schools, local policies. But I was told that it really fell apart when the feds stopped subsidizing tobacco. And when farmers were not subsidized for growing tobacco, they got out of it. I think there's some really important parallels to be drawn there. And honestly, I don't know how we tackle obesity. I really don't until we start tackling federal food policy. It's a really tough thing to do, but I really don't know how we get there until food companies can make money and make a profit by selling healthful foods that meet the dietary guidelines. Until that happens, which means that consumers can buy them and they can produce them with a profit, I'm not optimistic. So thank you for that question.
Anyone else? Yes, please, get her a microphone, please. Far section.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Erin Beal, and my question is more about mental health, actually. Leslie, I think you talked about mindful eating, and I'm just wondering, first, just historically, what has been the conversation around mental health and how it relates to, eating behaviors? And given that we're seeing more depression in the adult population, is that something that needs to be talked about more? And how can we bring that into the conversation more?
I think it's a hugely important issue that we need to bring into the conversation. So I recently finished a intervention with 2-year college students. And I was trying to get them to change what they ate and be more physically active to reduce unhealthy weight gain. And I said, we're going to start every class with 5 minutes of mindfulness or meditation. Because we were offering food, and my staff said, "Oh no, you're not going to do that. they're not going to get that." And I said, "Let's just try it." So the students are running around all day. They get to class, and we figure out different kinds of things: centering activities, imagery things, meditation. I brought in a yoga instructor. They loved it. I think that I think a lot of people are actually craving a way to calm down, and in that calming down and centering, being able to be more thoughtful about what am I going to eat. You know, you almost have to be in a calm space to make a good decision. I really think that's an important area. You know, I think it's going to take a while for us to start having that conversation, but mental health is, you know, so linked to our physical health that we need to start thinking about how that works.
You know, I heard a dietitian just this past week talk about a thing they do where they have people chew a raisin with their eyes closed before they eat and experience the raisin and think about the flavors and experience. And that is, I mean, kind of a Zen way to kind of calm down, but also to open your mind to the fact that you're going to eat food and you need to taste it on its way through the mouth. And then also regulate yourself. I mean, it's a means of kind of centering yourself, and I think that is part of that. I thought that was kind of a clever thing.
Right here in the center.
Hi, Jessica Todd with ERS from the USDA, or Economic Research Service, I should say. So at the beginning of the panel, there was some discussion about reading food labels and trying to make choices, and there's a lot of attention on incremental choices. And as a researcher, my colleagues and I are often wondering, what is it about the nutrition facts panel or a food label that provides information that consumers can use to meet the dietary guidelines? And frankly, there isn't much on there, right? There is nothing about vegetable content or fruit content or servings of meat, right? It's about the micro and macronutrients, which is not what the dietary guidelines tell you to eat, right? We eat food. And so my question, I guess, to the broader community is, how can we make that label align with what we're telling consumers to do? Because frankly, most foods that people are buying, even when they're buying food to take home, is in a package, right? That they're not, time constraints, our lifestyles are requiring that, but the label doesn't tell you what you're getting, right? So it might be something that we could do, and food manufacturers can compete on the quantity of fruit in a breakfast bar or a granola bar, and the quantity of fiber, or whole grains versus the fiber or the sugar or the fat.
Now, I was on the Facts Up Front panel advisory group, and we were looking at some of those same issues. You know, Facts Up Front is the little bars on the front of the package, and after some debate, we got, along with the usual suspects, you know, the calories and the sugar and all the stuff, we managed to get a second half of that where they were allowed to put a couple of the things that you needed to know. Is this got fiber in it? Does it have vitamin A or C in it and things? But to me, it gave an opportunity to compare one thing in my, you know, I'm going to eat a brownie. Is this brownie have more calories or less calories? And it really helped that. And the nice thing is the studies have been done that show that the ones who use that the most effectively have been African American and Hispanic moms, and who even the ones who had not a lot of formal education understood it. It was clear they knew it, and they knew how to compare packages. But it does drift away from when you're asking people to eat from the 5 food groups and build a foundation of nutrient-rich foods. That still isn't that information that I need to know. I want to know, is this thing got something behind the taste that's going to give me something, and how does it compare? So I think we were a ways away from understanding the best way to do labeling, but that Facts Up Front panel the evidence that's coming out is that that's working, and it does communicate with the public, which is great to know.
I think one of the issues with food labels that I've always had is that a lot of things we want people to eat don't have labels. We really want them to choose from the produce. There's no label there. And so, you know, the more we talk about food labels, the more I think we are suggesting to the population that you're going to buy processed foods that have a label on them. So I think we need to be careful about how we talk about food labels as nutrition educators. We really want people to buy the fruits and the veggies that don't have labels, and we want them to buy the lean meats in the meat counter. But I think your comment, Bob, about, for me, the most useful piece of food labels is comparing two products.
Right.
I mean, to try to plan, to say that someone's going to plan their week's menu by looking at food labels, I don't know how you could do it. But if I have to decide between this pizza and this pizza,
Right.
the food label helps me do that. And so I think we need to be really clear about what we think people are going to do with those food labels.
That's the real key thing. It's a point of sale. They've already made a decision. I'm
Right.
going to buy this cereal, or I'm going to buy
I'm
a
gonna buy a
cereal,
cereal.
and which one works for me. I would love to see vegetables and fruits labeled as well, though, as what, because I mean, you think about it. We talked about iceberg lettuce versus spinach or kale or watercress. Huge difference in nutrition. We lump fruits and vegetables into one giant category, slap fresh on the front, and expect that to work. Well, celery doesn't cut it compared to other things. And I think the public needs to be able to look at point of sale there too and say, I get better from this lettuce mix than from another lettuce mix.
Hey, our thanks to the panel for what could obviously be a day-long discussion. Thank you so much for our understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.